from not fairy tale romances to exploring, revisiting literary traditions, you all find that in Arth, a culture fest, the initiative. Now we move on to the next forum of the day, New Vistas in Young Indic Writing, and that kind of interests me and also kind of makes me curious to know how is generic writing different from Indic writing, and I'm sure the panelists will throw light for that. Apart from discussing the roadmap ahead, we have with us a very, very distinguished panel, and I'd like to invite one by one. I'll begin with Shubhrastha, who started as a freelance journalist and newsreader at All India Radio. After gaining adequate experience in these fields, she shifted to the field of political consultancy. She's recently started a YouTube channel called The Churn. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Shubhrastha. We have with us Rajeev Mantri, who's an India-based entrepreneur and investor investing in public companies and early-stage technology ventures. Rajeev Mantri joining us on the second day of Arth. We have with us Arjun Singh Kadian, who's an established author, currently working as an academic and policy professional out of offices in Haryana and Delhi. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Arjun Singh Kadian. In conversation with this panel is Kushal Mehra, who is a textile entrepreneur from Mumbai and the host of Karvaka podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, let's explore New Vistas in Young Indic Writing. Let's see what the future holds for us. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. All right, so as we know, today's discussion is Young Vistas in Indic Writing. So let's start with this. So I was thinking about this, right? So how would we differentiate these genres? So if we are talking about a genre like Indic writing, so how does Indic writing differentiate from, say, general writing? Is something that was, kind of going on in my mind all the time. So Shubhrastha, let's start with you. And maybe this question is for all three of you. Then how do we differentiate? So let's say if I write a book, what makes it Indic?
Thank you, Kushalji, for opening this session with such a thought-provoking question. Because as a student of literature, I think that I'm aware of the politics of categorization, genre making and all of that. And it's important to recognize that if we are talking about a postmodern world in the Indian space today, I wouldn't really call it Indic alone, in the Indian space today, where all products of past, in terms of art, culture, literature, all forms of expression are changing and we are coming up with something new, is what the claim really is from both the dispensation, the thought dispensations. The dispensation that's quote unquote ruling the roost and the dispensation that's opposing this roost. So in that sense, I think why should everything not be Indic? Those who are opposing this so-called new writing, I don't believe that there's new writing happening, by the way. I'm a huge proponent of T.S. Eliot, who said very authoritatively that anything that you build is built on the vestiges of past. At the max, you can add certain layers to it.
True.
And so in that sense, what really is new? With the recent controversy that we have seen on one of our star historians who has put in painstaking amount of work to write a book over years, then all the boundaries are really muddled. What is new writing? If Vikram Sampath's book today, according to the to those who are creating an unnecessary controversy, if it is not new, then I really don't know what new writing is.
Yeah, so I'm going to take this. So Rajiv, let's say, you wrote a wonderful book, A New Idea of India. So now if I was to connect it, she made a good point there that, Vikram's book now, there are historians, and so Vikram is a historian, right? So what is so, again, the whole point is like you co-wrote a book with Harsh, and your book spans the entire panoply of the legal history of India, the political history of India, and how do we go forward as a country. So if I was to say, if we're talking about Indic, is it a differentiating factor would be the lens that we look at it from? So we were used to a lens that every time we read a book, right? There is Occidentalism, there is Orientalism, right? So there are different lenses where you write a book, when you create something. So would you say when you guys started writing that book, were you looking at it from a new lens, or in your view, the lens was the same?
No, so I would say we didn't think of it in that manner. We didn't think we were writing an Indic book per se. But the way the framing is done, it suggests that there's something non-Indic. Now, if we dig further into that, what does Indic versus non-Indic mean? Indic to me essentially means something that is about India and about Bharat, the ancient civilization that is India. So, in that sense, what should and what can be really disconnected from this? And should we completely sort of divorce our view of the past in particular from these very ancient links, these very ancient connections that are prevailing? And to some extent, I think it is accurate to say that this was happening in our country. We were told that history begins in 1947. We were told that even science technology begins in 1947. Philosophy begins later than that. And to a large extent, we ignored a multi-millennia kind of tradition, a multi-millennia record of what India had been, of what Bharat had been, of what our civilization had achieved. And today, more people are realizing that that is something worth talking about, that is something worth treasuring, worth teaching to our next generations. So, when that is happening, that introduces something new onto the landscape, and thus a section of people are labeling it Indic. But to me, I ask the question, why didn't this exist earlier? Why didn't we have this earlier? And part of the answer is that there was a certain control over platforms. There was a certain control over who gets to write a book, who gets to write even newspaper columns, who gets to shape opinions, who gets to conduct scholarship and research. Now, all of those things are getting democratized. And one of the trends, one of the drivers behind that trend is the power of the internet, which has given this ability into the hands of independent researchers, independent scholars, who are now taking this up, exploring their own history. And now we don't need some South Asian studies department, 3,000 kilometers or 5,000 kilometers away, telling us who we are. We are able to figure that out ourselves by exploring our past, by exploring our very rich history and heritage.
So that brings me to you, Arjun, because in anthropology, they say there is an emic view and then there is an etic view, right? So the emic view would be the view of the person who is the insider, and the etic view is where they try to create a narrative based on certain uniform standards or certain things. So now your book is a classic case. Now, you wrote a book about Haryana, right? So if we look at the history of Haryana as a state, now, again, this is a classic case of the emic view and the etic view. So maybe like Rajiv said, right, if somebody from the South Asian Studies department would have written a book on Haryana, would there be a differentiation when they would have written it?
So absolutely, I'd like to pick from where Shubhrastha ji and Rajiv ji has said. It's been a few years now that we've been consistently talking about the distortion of Indian history, how there are certain topics, certain ideas that are not generally talked about. And even history, for that matter, is written and then propagated with a certain mindset. Now, that mindset might be questioned and discussed on this platform and others as well. However, it's important that consistently we've felt, and as I was doing the research for my book, that throughout history, the last many decades, we see that the ideas, that the thoughts, the opinions about region Haryana, and thereon I talk about India as well, is spoken about with a certain mindset. And that mindset essentially portrays India as a land where, different things have happened, and different things have happened as a result of, the British rule, or how the colonialists want to portray it. However, what has happened in the last decade essentially is coming up of new writers, authors, content creators, where essentially internet has a role to play. But then there needs to be content on internet, and that content needs to be backed by certain literature. And that literature has to be backed by, because that is the way of world of writing, that is the way the world of writing works. It has to be referenced multiple times. So consistently we see in the last 200 years there have been certain information, certain texts, certain books which have been written with a certain mindset. And then it was very tough to break those barriers and write something new. And that is where we find people like Sanjeev Sanyal, Vikram Sampath, who've done some remarkable work, remarkable as such, to give people like me also a platform. That the book is out there is because of the idea that I was able to speak to these people, get into conversation with these people, understand how book writing works, and understand the rigor behind it, so that when we are out there working on something, we are able to produce some value. And that change has come around. And when you say that what Indic writing is, essentially it is all writing about India with a mindset which represents what Indic or Indian culture is about. Now, then we go on a different argument what Indian culture is about. However, at the core of it, you understand that the country and the country's civilization and culture, that is written about, portrayed with pride. And because in the last, the literature that I'm referring to, somehow or the other, the students who read this literature, they come with a, I won't go as far as to say, but inferiority complex, which was a huge challenge, which needed a certain correction. And that certain correction is essentially coming in the last decade, because of the works that, my co-panelists have done, because of the works that people like Sanyal and Sampath have done. And, that is where we build upon.
The underlying theme that I could get when all three of you were speaking was that maybe before, a while ago, there was this concept of gatekeeping, right? So let's say person X, person Y, person Z, as long as they toe a certain line and toe a certain way of writing. And मतलब कहते हैं ना कि आप ये कह सकते हैं, मगर इससे ज़्यादा मत कहिएगा कहीं हानि ना पहुंच जाए किसी को.
बुरा ना लग जाए किसी को.
बुरा ना लग जाए. किसी को बुरा ना लग जाए. So do you think what we are calling Indic writing is basically the gates have kind of opened then, and now we have this new era of writers? So necessarily maybe the writers are the same, the style is the same, the format is the same. It's just new people and new topics are coming up which were maybe not, let's say they were no-go zones in the world of certain elite gatekeepers then?
No, I think we have a foot in the door. Yes, we've made that breach. However, yes, to a certain extent, if I did not have the right guidance, if this, gates must not have or would not have opened, a book on Haryana, published by a national publisher, would not have been, seen the light of the day. Because consistently, we had a conversation about this earlier as well, that for long, Haryana has been represented in a certain way. And there is no certain literature also, documented literature about Haryana. So, because the change is setting in, because new stories are coming in, because stories which are very, rooted are coming around, and there are people who are writing it, and that is how the change is coming around. I'm open to you and your comments as well.
So, I agree with Arjun that I think people are more interested in micro histories, if we can call it that. So what we had earlier, पहले क्या था कि there are only grand narratives about India, and that too from one particular angle. So it was almost a very monochromatic picture. And now we have a much better, I would say, take that analogy forward, maybe a high definition, multicolored, like a more variegated kind of picture of India, which is creating space for many voices, which is creating space for many kinds of views and these micro histories, where let's say someone could be interested in history of Haryana, someone could be interested in a history of Rajasthan.
Shubhrastha's case, Northeast,
the Northeastern region, Assam. Yes. So as a country now, and I think this is also tied somewhere to economic progress, to sort of economic growth. As per capita incomes are increasing, people want to learn more. कि okay, where did we come from? You know, it's a classical kind of almost a very human question that once you have the basics in life, you start thinking ki where did all this come from? Where did I come from? Where did my family or my heritage come from? And then you explore around a little bit, and then you don't find much. Earlier you're not finding much available to answer your questions, but now scholars are coming up, researchers are coming up who are addressing these questions. So I think it's tied to both economic progress as well as some of those gatekeepers kind of falling away due to technological.
So let me ask this to Shubhrastha then. Shubhrastha, रीजनल लैंग्वेज में जैसे हिंदी भाषा हो या मराठी, कोई भी हमारे अलग अलग प्रांत की भाषाएं हैं, उसमें तो हमेशा से पुस्तकें लिखी ही जा रही थी. सो वुड यू से देन इंडिक राइटिंग इज दिस न्यू जॉनरा क्रिएटेड मे बी इन द इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज? क्योंकि अगर रीजनल लैंग्वेज देखें हम तो ज़्यादातर जो इश्यूज हम आज बोल रहे हैं शायद हिंदी में तो ये लिखे ही जा रहे होंगे, या maybe in a different way. For example, हम गीता प्रेस गोरखपुर को लें. It's a giant printing house, right? गीता प्रेस गोरखपुर. And anybody who picks up, let's say, material from गीता प्रेस गोरखपुर, they have history, they have philosophy, they have many other genres that they cover. So would you say then this is maybe the gatekeeping was especially in the English language format?
Yes, I think I was going to address this, and while all the other speakers were speaking, I was actually looking at a couple of poems that have now been validated, so as to say. This year, actually, something very interesting happened. For the first time, Sahitya Akademi gave the most noted prize to 2 women authors, women poets. This is the first time in the history of independent India that 2 women poets were recognized. One is Anamika. She writes in Hindi, is a professor of English at Delhi University. And the other is Arundhati Subramaniam, who has already made a name and has already established herself. When I was in college, I used to read her. So, I actually wanted to quote something from what Anamika ji has written. It's a poem about women and all of that, but these few words really echo what all of us have been trying to say. सुनो हमें अनहद की तरह और समझो जैसे समझी जाती है नई नई सीखी हुई भाषा. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि अनहद नहीं था, अनहद तो था. ऐसा भी नहीं है कि हम जो बात बोल रहे हैं वो कुछ नई बात बोल रहे हैं. बस भाषा बदल गई है, हमारा तेवर बदल गया है और हम जो कह रहे हैं वो रिकॉग्नाइज हो रहा है. बस इतनी सी बात है. क्योंकि अगर मैं एक उदाहरण दूं तो बैटल ऑफ मरहौड़ा एक हुआ, हमारे बिहार में एक बैटल ऑफ मरहौड़ा हुआ. बैटल ऑफ मरहौड़ा पे पोएम लिखी गई. बैटल ऑफ मरहौड़ा एकमात्र, मुझे लगता है भारतीय इतिहास में एकमात्र ऐसी घटना रही होगी जहां गांधी के नाम पर हिंसा हुई. महिलाएं सामने भोजपुर क्षेत्र की महिलाएं जा करके भिड़ गई अंग्रेजों से. वो लैंड वाला इशू, वो लगान वाला सारा जो इशू हम लोगों ने फिल्मों में देखा, वो भिड़ गई और खड़े होकर के ब्रिटिशर्स के सामने गांधी बाबा की जय बोलते हुए गोलियां बरसाई. तो ये कहानियां ऐसा नहीं है कि नहीं थी, और ये कहानियां थी भी, इन पे लिखा भी गया. लेकिन उन राइटर्स को पढ़ना, उनको देखना, उनको नए चश्मे से बस एक नजर देख लेना इतना हीन माना जाता था कि आज भी हमारे जो बहुत एलीट यूनिवर्सिटीज हैं भारत के, वहां के कुछ एलीट डिपार्टमेंट्स में आप इन पे चर्चा नहीं कर सकते. और आप करेंगे तो आपके पास 4 क्रिटिक्स होंगे जो बैटल ऑफ मरहौड़ा को ऐसे पोस्ट कोलोनियल, पोस्ट मॉडर्न, पोस्ट फेमिनिस्ट लेंस, पोस्ट मार्क्सिस्ट, पोस्ट स्ट्रक्चरलिस्ट लेंस से देखने के लिए मजबूर कर देंगे कि वो जो मेन कहानी है एक महिला समूह की जिसने जाके ब्रिटिशर्स को टक्कर दी, वो कहीं गौण हो जाएगा, बाकी स्ट्रक्चर्स आगे हो जाएंगे. इसीलिए मुझे ऐतराज है ये पूरे जॉनर की जो पॉलिटिक्स है उससे मुझे ऐतराज है. मुझे ऐतराज है इंडिक शब्द के पॉलिटिसाइजेशन से. मुझे ऐतराज है यंग शब्द के पॉलिटिसाइजेशन से. अगर मैं आज मैंने एक छोटी सी कविता लिखी कल परसों, जो कि अभी काफी छोटा जो साहित्यिक समूह है उसमें काफी सराही जा रही है कि नहीं ये बहुत नई कविता नहीं है. मेरी जंघाओं पे शिवालिक की दूरवा को तोड़कर अगर मैंने अपनी विदाई खुद रचाई, तो ये शिवालिक वही है जो मैं सुनती आ रही थी, जो मैंने शिव पुराण में पढ़ा था. मैं उसी देवी का आह्वान कर रही हूं जिनको आज तक हमारे सभी तरीके के मांत्रिक, तांत्रिक सभी शास्त्रियों ने आह्वान किया. मैं नया कहां लिख रही हूं. हाँ, लेकिन ये लिखने का कॉन्फिडेंस जरूर आया है. मैं अगर जिस कॉलेज से पढ़ी, जिस डिपार्टमेंट से पढ़ी और जिस तरीके के माहौल में मैं काम कर रही थी, उस माहौल में शायद 10 साल पहले ये लिखती तो मैं शायद व्हाट्सएप ग्रुप्स पे शेयर नहीं करती कि मेरी अपनी रचना है, मैं इसको बचा कर रखूंगी. तो ये कॉन्फिडेंस आया है, लेकिन इस कॉन्फिडेंस को मुझे लगता है बहुत अलग तरीके से, बहुत ज़्यादा एक्सूबरेंस में रीड कर रहे हैं। और आगे हम चर्चा करेंगे ही, तो मैं ये इस पे भी एलैबोरेट करूंगी, मैं क्यों कह रही हूं कि हम एक्सूबरेंस को ओवर रीड कर रहे हैं। 50 प्लस के लोगों के लिए तो ये एक्सूबरेंस ठीक है, लेकिन हमारे लिए एक्सूबरेंस घातक है। जिन लोगों को अपनी जिंदगी जीनी थी, जिन लोगों को इस विषय पे राजनीति करनी थी, वो राजनीति के शीर्ष पर है। अब ये जो नई पौध है, हम लोगों को मैं उस इंक्लूड कर रही हूं, हालांकि हम उतने नए नहीं रहे जो 18-19 साल के जो फर्स्ट टाइम वोटर्स हैं, लेकिन इस नई पौध के लिए ये जो प्राइड है, कल्चरल प्राइड, वो एक पॉइंट पे जाके बहुत घातक हो जाता है। क्योंकि आज से 25-30 साल बाद जब हमारी नेक्स्ट जनरेशन पूछेगी आपने क्या क्रिएट किया, तो फिर अगर हम सिर्फ बैटल ऑफ मढ़ौरा के बारे में बात करेंगे तो कुछ नया नहीं होगा। आज कौन सी बैटल है जिसपे हमने नए तरीके से नई इबारत जो लिखी है वो क्या है? दैट इज अ क्वेश्चन व्हिच रियली हॉन्ट्स मी।
तो इसको आगे बढ़ाते हैं, जैसे अभी you just mentioned कि what do we do? So that's the next part, right? What does the future hold? So Rajiv, obviously you mentioned the internet playing a huge role in this entire process of how. So and that's a very interesting thing because the internet was there for a while. So were we the people who were not allowed? So I'm not speaking for myself. I'm just talking about this fictitious character that was not being allowed by the gatekeepers. So was the internet in a way the platform where I could polish my skills as a writer, where maybe I would write a Facebook page post which is, let's say, X number of words. Maybe I'll go to a blog spot and I'll polish my writing. Maybe I'll go to somebody else's blog spot and write comments, long form comments, and then I'll learn exchanges over there. How do I form arguments? So what do you think when we talk about it from that sense? So has the internet actually played a role? Because in a way, if we look at everybody over here, you guys have a job or a life outside of your book writing too. Now, in the case of the gatekeepers, that's all they do. They keep writing, right? They just day in and day out, they're churning out books, they're churning out things. Now, in your case, you're doing something and now you are doing this parallelly. So, how hard it is, or it's not that hard then? Maybe Rajiv, you can start and then Arjun can come in.
No, most certainly it is. I think at least for me and even for our book, which I co-wrote with Harsh Madhusudan, I think it was quite challenging for us, balancing both our sort of professional lives as well as completing a book of this nature, which was a big research project. It was a big sort of writing project. Obviously, getting it together, it was a very big challenge, and it just came through somehow. But I do think on the point of the internet, so obviously we all think, yeah, sure, the internet has been around for 10-20 years, what's different? But frankly, it's really taken off in India only in the last, maybe, especially in the last 6 years, and maybe in the last 10 years. And it was more so with the advent of the mobile internet on all our phones. So earlier, when the internet was predominantly on laptops and desktops, ये ज़्यादातर लोगों के पहुंच के बाहर था. मतलब कितने लोग अपने घर में कंप्यूटर लगा सकते हैं इस तरह से? बहुत कम लोग हैं. कितने लोगों के घर में ऐसा डायल अप कनेक्शन या ब्रॉडबैंड कनेक्शन कभी आया होगा? हार्डली एनीवन. As a ratio of the population is a very small elite, you can say. So I think it has really gone mass scale now, thanks to availability of cheap data, availability of low cost hardware. मतलब phones आजकल 4-6 हज़ार रुपए में स्मार्टफोन मिल रहा है, so लोग ले रहे हैं. So this is the true democratization, कि almost everyone can become a creator. You can take your phone, you can get onto social media platforms, you can express yourself. And this was not possible earlier. Earlier, the only thing you could do is, tune into Distortion and watch the news. And the same 5 people will come and tell you what is actually happening in the country. And they obviously probably live within 5 kilometers of each other here in Delhi. And from sitting, they were real geniuses in that, sitting here, they could tell you exactly what's happening all over the country, right? Most of them never even left Delhi. Then we graduated to satellite television. Obviously, Z Group, which is hosting this Culture Fest, was a pioneer in that area. And then there was a slightly better option, a sort of bouquet of options available for viewers कि और थोड़े TV channel आए, तो 4 shed उसमें news channels बने. तो another decade later, then you have the internet, where today anyone can start a Twitter Spaces. I mean, Kushal, you run a very successful, very popular YouTube channel, which has a very impressive following. So all of us are now doing this in that way, and we can't be stopped, really, or at least can't be stopped very easily, just by someone who thinks ki I know better and I won't let you speak. So I think that is the real change. And as Shubhrastha was mentioning, maybe this undercurrent was always there in our society. It's not a new thing that has developed, but it was always there. But somewhere it was not finding an avenue. उसको कहीं वो बाहर आने की जगह नहीं मिल रही थी. अब जगह मिल रही है तो अब सब बात कर रहे हैं.
True. So let us take a few questions too now.
No, I'll just add to what the fellow panelists have said. वो जैसे शुभ्रस्ता जी बात कर रही है ना, कहानियाँ थी, किस्से थे, दर्द था, दर्द का एहसास था, पर कभी भी ऐसा नहीं हो पाया कि हमें वो उतनी अपॉर्चुनिटी मिल पाती होती. वो अपॉर्चुनिटी मिली है 6 साल या प्लस के 10 साल के अंदर, और उसके अंदर कंसिस्टेंटली अच्छा वर्क आ रहा है. एंड अच्छा वर्क ऐसा नहीं था कि पहले नहीं था, बट उसको नेशनल या इंटरनेशनल रीच मिलना वाज अ ह्यूज चैलेंज, जो इन द लास्ट फ्यू ईयर्स हैज एसेंशियली चेंज. एंड जैसे बात कर रहे थे इंटरनेट, आई थिंक ब्लॉगस्पॉट मेड इमेंस डिफरेंस. आई नो अ लॉट ऑफ ब्लॉगर्स जिन्होंने कितनी लोकल कहानियाँ लेकर आए हैं ब्लॉगिंग करके, और उन्हीं कहानियों पे एसेंशियली ऑल ऑफ अस आर बिल्ट अपॉन दो स्टोरीज, क्योंकि उनसे इंस्पिरेशन लेकर फिर धीरे धीरे रियलाइज़ हुआ कि और भी लिखा जाना चाहिए. ये रियलाइज़ हुआ कि कमी कहाँ है, कौन से मुद्दे पर लिखना चाहिए, कहाँ पर कौन सी ऐसी बात है जो बोलने में कोई झिझक रहा है या हिचकिचा रहा है. वो सारे के सारे चेंजेस एसेंशियली हैव हैपेंड इन द लास्ट फ्यू ईयर्स.
तो इन अ वे वैसे भी ये 75वीं आज़ादी का अमृत महोत्सव है, तो फिर शुभ्रता ये तो कह सकते हैं कि इंटरनेट ने हमें वाकई में आज़ादी दी है. हाँ, पॉलिटिकल और सोशल आज़ादी नहीं, सोचने की और बोलने की और अपने आप को एक्सप्रेस करने की आज़ादी, ये तो हमें मानना ही पड़ेगा ना.
जी जी बिल्कुल मानना पड़ेगा. और इसमें इंटरनेट से विस्तार हुआ है, डेमोक्रेटाइजेशन हुआ है, लोकतांत्रिकरण हुआ है, विचारों का भी, विचारों को एक्सेप्ट करने का भी, वो सब कुछ ठीक है. मुझे लगता है हमारी जनरेशन के पास सवाल दूसरा है. हमारी जनरेशन के पास सवाल ये है कि किसकी जगह क्या होनी चाहिए. पीपल की जगह अहाते में है. तुलसी अपना स्थान घर में ही मांगती है. आप उसको घर के आंगन के बीच रख सकते हैं या घर के बाहर रख सकते हैं, बट आप तुलसी को पीपल की तरह कहीं भी पीपल को आप तुलसी की तरह उस तरीके का सम्मान नहीं देते जिस तरीके का सम्मान तुलसी को मिलता है. तो ये जो समस्या है, या फिर ये जो भी हम कॉन्वर्सेशन करें, वो तुलसी और पीपल वाली समस्या है. घर के अहाते में आप पीपल लगाना नहीं चाहेंगे. अगर मैंने बोल दिया हो तो गड़बड़ हो गया हो. घर के अहाते में पीपल नहीं लगाया जाता. पीपल घर के बाहर अपने गांव की चौहद्दी पर लगाया जाता है, क्योंकि उसमें वो देवत्व नहीं है जो तुलसी में है. आप पीपल की पूजा करते करते आप उसको देव बना सकते हैं, बट तुलसी अपने आप में एक देवी स्वरूपा है. ये थोड़ा मैं एब्स्ट्रैक्ट में बात इसलिए कर रही हूँ कि जो नया लेखन आ रहा है, या जो भी नए नवोदित जो लेखक हैं, लेखिकाएं हैं, उन सबके साथ समस्या या जो चैलेंज है वो ये है कि वो इंटरनेट कवि हैं, वो इंटरनेट लेखक हैं, वो ट्विटर लेखक हैं, या वो सीरियस राइटिंग कर रहे हैं. ये सवाल है. और हमारी जनरेशन को चूंकि अभी बहुत सारी नई चीजें आ रही हैं जिनको हम नए तरीके से देख रहे हैं, तो बहुत सारी चीजें जो पॉपुलर नहीं थी, जो पॉपुलर अब हो रही हैं, हम उसको बहुत जल्दी साहित्य की पराकाष्ठा मान ले रहे हैं, हिस्ट्री राइटिंग की पराकाष्ठा मान ले रहे हैं. मैं एक उदाहरण देना चाहती हूँ. विक्रम जी की किताब, संजीव सान्याल जी की किताब, हमारी किताब नॉर्थ ईस्ट पे कभी नहीं लिखा गया, कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी रिकॉग्नाइज कर रही है कि ये तो स्टोरी नहीं पढ़ी, नेशनलिज्म पे ये परिभाषा हमने नहीं देखी, वो सब ठीक है, पर क्या हम नई बात कह रहे हैं? नई बात मीनाक्षी जैन जी ने की. जिस जमाने में मीनाक्षी जी लिख रही थी, वो जमाना आज का जमाना नहीं था, इंटरनेट का जमाना नहीं था कि हम कुछ भी लिखते थे और वो वायरल होता था. वो तपस्या जो उन्होंने की है, वो तपस्या हमने नहीं की. मैं इसीलिए बार बार ये कह रही हूँ, ये पीपल और तुलसी का जो संघर्ष है उसको समझना होगा. अपने जमाने में मीनाक्षी जी को जिस तरीके से किया गया, इंटेलेक्चुअली इनकार्सरेट किया गया, वो अपने ही डिपार्टमेंट की वो पीपल बन के रह गई थी. जहां पर कुछ विशेष लोग जाते थे उनकी पूजा करने, उनको तुलसी बनने में बहुत बड़ा योगदान इंटरनेट का रहा, लेकिन वो तुलसी थी ही, ये रिकॉग्नाइज करना आज हम समझ पा रहे हैं उस चीज को। तो ये बहुत पेचीदा सवाल है। मैं फिर से कहूंगी, जो 50-60 वय वाले जो लोग हैं उनके लिए ये बहुत बड़ा सवाल नहीं है, ये सवाल हमारे लिए है। हम किस क्वालिटी की राइटिंग कर रहे हैं, हम जो लिख रहे हैं उसका लॉन्ग टर्म इम्पैक्ट क्या है, हम सिर्फ वही चीज लिख रहे हैं जो युवा पढ़ना चाहते हैं, जो एक पर्टिकुलर वर्ग के युवा पढ़ना चाहते हैं, क्या हम वो चीजें लिख रहे हैं जो बहुत जल्दी पॉपुलर होंगी, या हम क्या कुछ भविष्य को का सोच करके लिख रहे हैं? ये बहुत बड़े बड़े सवाल हैं हमारे सामने।
नहीं, सो एब्सोल्युटली पिकिंग अप फ्रॉम देयर, बहुत लोगों ने कंसिस्टेंटली काम किया है और उसी पर आई थिंक ऑल ऑफ अस स्टैंड ऑन देयर शोल्डर्स ओनली। और इसके पीछे, इंडिक राइटिंग के पीछे या फिर राइटिंग इन जनरल के पीछे एक पेन्स टेकिंग रिसर्च और रिगर लगता है, विच प्रॉबेबली वेर यू कमिंग फ्रॉम के इंटरनेट के बाद शायद उसके अंदर इतना ना हो, चाहे उतना फैक्ट चेकिंग, उसमें एक एफर्ट लगता है। दैट इज़ वाई बुक राइटिंग और रिसर्चिंग ऑन एनी सब्जेक्ट इज़ ए ह्यूज चैलेंज, एंड दैट इज़ वाई इट्स कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन जिस लेवल का है उसी तरह से उसको ट्रीट भी करना चाहिए। और ये बात भी सच है, जैसे ने मीनाक्षी जी के बारे में बताया, ऐसे अनगिनत ऐसे बहुत दिग्गज लेखक रहे हैं, पर उनकी सीताराम गोयल जी, राम स्वरूप जी, सो देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पीपल हु रिटन इनफ, बट उनको वो एवेन्यू नहीं मिल पा रहा था, वो डिस्कशन नहीं हो पा रहा था, एंड बहुत कन्वीनियंटली एंड साइलेंटली आई थिंक हम सभी वो अवॉइड कर रहे हैं। इसके अंदर एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट रोल लीडरशिप का भी रहा है। इफ़ से द करंट गवर्नमेंट, बीजेपी गवर्नमेंट पावर में ना होती तो शायद वो एवेन्यू भी हमें बड़े मुश्किल से मिलता, एंड नो डिनाइंग द फैक्ट। आई थिंक हम कन्वीनियंटली शायद उसको थोड़ा आराम से प्यार से बोलने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, बट देयर इज अ ह्यूज डिफरेंस दैट हैज हैपेंड।
इसमें इज अ क्वेश्चन ऑफ व्हाट कम्स फर्स्ट। डज द, if you can call it, the ideological movement precedes a change in government, or does a change in government bring?
It's a classic chicken and egg scenario, right? But to me, it's not just that. It's about a quality versus quantity issue, which Shubhrastha has raised, and that's a very important point. So, what happens is, a lot of writing, what has happened in the post-internet world, जो मैं देख रहा हूँ, is बहुत लोग लिख रहे हैं, मगर एक होता है लिखना और एक होता है लिखना जिसका कुछ इम्पैक्ट हो। अब आज के ज़माने में, आज का ज़माना है, राजीव का फेवरेट जॉनरा है मीम। सो आजकल आप मीम से अट्रैक्ट करते हो लोगों को, इमेजरी अट्रैक्ट्स पीपल, राइट? आप टिकटॉक वीडियोस बनाते हो, ऐसे टाइम पे आप तीनों ऑथर हो, all of you are into something which requires your consumer, because at the end of the day it's a consumer, right? It's someone who's going to consume the words that you've written. So Rajiv, first with you, how are you going to make sure that in a generation that is being raised and being brought up in a short attention span, so let's take for example, like let's say I'm a book nerd, so I would love to read a 1,000-page book. But nowadays, when you sit with a publisher too, they're going to be like 200 pages, 250 pages, right? Now in the TikTok generation, they'll be like, "Bhai, 100 page kar dena." So how do you manage that as an author?
So firstly, I don't think this is a new phenomenon. So I think both serious writers as well as serious readers, thinkers, have always been a small section. We can't expect everyone to be interested in, deep writing on heavy subjects. It's just not how, frankly, I don't even think that's how the world works. It is always a small section of people who are trying to articulate it. And then, people make their own sort of understanding out of it, and it sort of percolates in the system. I mean, frankly, if we were talking about giants like Meenakshi Jain ji, Sitaram Goyal ji, Ram Swarup ji, if you read their works, you will see that even in today's arguments, there are echoes of their works. So while people may not know their names, the ideas are still there. And the idea, a great idea, is the ultimate meme, Kushal. An idea, the power that it has to sort of persist, survive, perpetrate itself, that is the ultimate victory. And I think the way out of this is not to compete by making memes or trying to write a 25-page compressed version of some important subject, but just write a good book which will stand the test of time. which is well researched, which is well written, and which becomes a reference volume in its own right. Ki, even 30 years later, 50 years later, people say, ki, oh, that was a book which, if you want to learn about this subject, this is the book to read.
So another thing that I wanted to, maybe Arjun and Shubhrastha, you two can take it. A very important aspect, which I have realized a lot of times that I think gets, I would say ignored, is not only just a book, but what do you take out of a book? Rajiv just mentioned कि let's say सीताराम गोयल जी ने पुस्तकें लिखी थी और आज भी हम उनकी ideas को ले रहे हैं. But I think Indic writing, in my view, is not just about books. It's about essays. It's about long form essays. It could be 800 word articles. It could be 2,000 to 2,500 word articles. Now, in my view, and I could be wrong, so what I have understood from Indic writing is the writing that the gatekeepers did not want to come up. Let's say that is the loose definition of Indic writing. Now, do you think, Arjun, and maybe Shubhrastha can also come after that, do you think maybe in that area where, yes, books are coming up, but those academic essays where, let's say I take, Haryana, the land of gods, and maybe I take 15 factoids out of that, right? And I write 7 essays where I reference those books. Do you think that is happening?
Yes, of course, that is happening. In fact, there are multiple platforms which have come up wherein essay writing is going on. I believe Indic Academy runs one of the platforms. There's Pragyata. There are long form essays and short form essays which are coming around and actually getting a fair amount of readership as well. And of course, referencing and producing a work with enough rigor and bringing a work which is real scholarship in itself is a painstaking work. It's challenging, but then its rewards are not those rewards are not monetary or anything else. The returns essentially are the perpetuating an idea or telling or repeating that idea. Does that idea reverberate with the population, with the masses, slowly, and it will percolate down slowly. He rightly said it that, of course we are fighting the battle between, fighting the battle of gaining attention, that attention span, because people lose out attention very quickly in this internet generation where you're inspired too much by TikTok. But challenge is, those are two different fields of play, and in order to really push it further, it is important that we, with platforms like this, I'm an academic myself, so it is important that we bring back the culture of reading. It is important that we bring back the importance of reading diversity of authors. In fact, we mentioned about Sitaram Goelji. I was thoroughly, I genuinely was surprised during the course of research of the book, because he's written 2 volumes about destruction of Indian temples. And in the second volume or the first volume, he's documented that these are the temples which were destructed in this year by this person, and this is the source. Now, anybody who does not know about this does not know about a significant aspect of Indian history. And I had to, because I was documenting Haryana, I was able to find out more information and then reach the original source, which was a Persian document, and then go back into translation, then being sure that whatever I'm saying is factually correct. All of that is a painstaking task. And the final product has to deliver on all those references, has to deliver on the idea that the book tries to throw. And then, of course, those referenced works or the book can essentially be used as a reference for another essay. Now, that essay will later on percolate into a Facebook post. And that Facebook post will then get into Twitter. And then, of course, from Twitter, we'll get into Instagram memes. So, I've been saved from that by God's grace, but both of them have been clear victims.
No, I agree. I think Arjun has nailed the sort of waterfall pretty well. So it goes from long form to like short form video, if you can call it that, and not the other way around. So I think that's the true value of doing deep work, deep research, because that is frankly the raw material, right? Without the raw material, I mean, there can be no consumption in that media format either.
And all that work is definitely self-motivated. I mean, it's, that the work that you do, that it probably would not get you anything, much more than chairs on panel discussions like this. But the work or the reason why you want to do it is because you know that there's a story which is fiercely wanting to be told, but for some reason, like yourself, are not aware of it or have not read it. In fact, my second book also, it happened because I am trying to find a story, I'm trying to understand why something is happening. And I'm consistently surprised and failing at finding an original source to read about or understand that change that is setting in. And in the process, I write about the sports story of Haryana, because it's very convenient to say that, you know, Haryana के अंदर sports हमेशा से ही था. Medals तो अभी आना start हुए ना 20 सालों के अंदर. So that difference that has happened, मतलब nobody knows that story. तो वो जो कहानी है, वो जो किस्से हैं, वो जो जर्नी है, उसको लिखने का जो चैलेंज है वो इस वजह से आया, वो लिखने की जो अपॉर्चुनिटी वो इसलिए आई क्योंकि इससे पहले किसी ने उसके बारे में डिस्कशन किया ही नहीं था. एंड सो हियर वी आर फाइंडिंग दिस vacuums and, you know, voids in this world of academia and literature that needs to be filled, and we use that as an opportunity, and with of course a lot of work and hard work we just put in and think about a book, and that is what is happening, I believe.
Okay, चलो अभी थोड़ा श्रोताओं के प्रश्न लेते हैं. So Shubhrastha, I'll start with you. So एक क्वेश्चन था कि क्या आप सजेस्ट करेंगे कि यंग इंडिक ऑथर्स को पढ़ने से पहले क्लासिक टेक्स्ट पढ़ने चाहिए? दैट्स अ ग्रेट क्वेश्चन.
बिल्कुल पढ़ना चाहिए. बिल्कुल पढ़ना चाहिए. और मुझे लगता है कि आपकी जो भी भाषा हो, आप हिंदी भाषी अगर हैं तो गीता प्रेस की वो पुस्तकें उठाइए जहां पे संस्कृत टू हिंदी अनुवाद बहुत 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 ही उम्दा अनुवाद है, वो पढ़िए, क्योंकि आपको फिर कॉन्टेक्स्ट मिलेंगी चीजों का. अगर आप आमिश त्रिपाठी जी की ही सीता उठा करके पढ़ लेंगे तो फिर आपको एक पर्सपेक्टिव मिलेगा सीता का, सीता द वॉरियर. बट अगर आपको सीता दी एनवायरमेंटलिस्ट पढ़ना हो, सीता एक योद्धा के रूप में आपको पढ़ना हो, सीता के बारे में एक महिला के रूप में पढ़ना हो, एक ऐसी नारी जिन्होंने अपना सर्वस्व राम को दे दिया, और आज जो राम जन्मभूमि का जो बहुत खूबसूरत एक तरीके से हम कह सकते हैं कि उसकी एक राज तिलक लगा राम जी के माथे पे, लेकिन उसमें सीता की भूमिका कहाँ है? इन सभी प्रश्नों को जानने के लिए आपको वाल्मीकि रामायण पढ़ना होगा. वाल्मीकि रामायण के बाद आपको सीतायन उठानी होगी. सीतायन पढ़ने के बाद आपको सीता पे बाकी जो लोग लिख रहे हैं, जितने इंटरप्रिटेशंस आए लिटरेचर में भी, वो पढ़ना होगा. फिर आपको तब आपको समझ में आएगा कि ये जो कुछ बदमाश लोग जो मार्क्सिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव डाल रहे हैं सीता का, वो कहां से आ रहा है और क्या है उनका सोर्स. तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बहुत बहुत जरूरी है. जिन्होंने भी ये सवाल पूछा है, बहुत अच्छा सवाल है. क्लासिकल टेक्स्ट का तो कोई विकल्प नहीं है. आप और मुझे लगता है सिर्फ संस्कृत की ही बात क्यों, प्रधानमंत्री मोदी जी ने तमिल की बात की. तमिल को संस्कृत से ज्यादा, तमिल संस्कृत से भी पुरानी भाषा है. ऐसी सिचुएशन में आपकी जो भी भाषा हो, आप तमिल पढ़ते हो, तेलुगु पढ़ते हो, मलयाली पढ़ते हो, संस्कृत पढ़ते हो, सभी भाषाओं अपनी अपनी मातृभाषा में आप अपने क्लासिकल टेक्स्ट को पढ़िए, ताकि आपकी जो राइटिंग हो या आपकी जो समझ हो वो मल्टी लेयर्ड हो सके. Kushal ji, can I please excuse myself? No disrespect to the panelists, they're fabulous speakers. I really have to take this very important call that I scheduled.
So I'll just add something, Kushal, to that quickly. I've always thought that in India's education system, you know, we teach children William Wordsworth, William Shakespeare, and so on and so forth, but we don't teach them about our own classics. Why isn't this a part of our curriculum? Why is this not taught in schools? I mean, Mahabharat, Ramayana, ये हमारे देश की संस्कृति का एक हिस्सा है. It's part of our cultural heritage, and it should be taught in schools, which for whatever reason it is not, and I think that should change.
So what you're saying essentially is that maybe Ramayana and Mahabharat should be taught, let's say, in the literature section, something of that sort, right?
Yes.
Yep. All right, let's take the next
My
question.
stance is clear. क्लासिकल हो, इंडिक हो, पढ़ना चाहिए, और पढ़ने की आदत को या पढ़ने की उस नेचर को प्रोपगेट करना चाहिए. एंड वो रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है सबकी. मतलब एक वेल मीनिंग समाज की रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी होनी चाहिए कि आने वाली जनरेशन को पढ़ने की आदत डालें. और धीरे धीरे एक बार पढ़ने की आदत डल गई ना, वो आइडिया होता है ना कि एवरीबडी इज अ कम्युनिस्ट इन कॉलेज, and whenever they get into
Luckily, I was not.
and when you get into job market, you turn capitalist. तो धीरे धीरे of course mindset भी change होता है, because humans they change through as they age, and you know a lot of things happen in life, it's on them. But it's important that people read, And they, regardless of what you're reading, be it classical texts or Indic authors or anything else, just read. Get into that habit, get into that process, and ये वो churn है. आप उसके अंदर एक बार कूद गए तो कुछ ना कुछ अच्छा लेकर ही निकलोगे. और that is my in general stance. That I was able to write a book is because I was consuming and reading a lot of books. I think similar is the case with Rajiv and similar is the case with you as well. Someday you will also write a book.
Well, let's see about that. So on the topic of reading books, right? So someone has asked, smartphones के ज़माने में book reading का trend कम हो गया है. ऐसे में हम book reading को कैसे revive किया जा सकता है? राजीव?
नहीं, इसमें I have a different take. See, for those who don't like reading, don't read. And we should not force ourselves into something which we are just not liking, right? So different people learn in different ways. कुछ लोग होते हैं जो लोग वीडियोस देख के सीखते हैं, उस वीडियो से सीखो. कुछ लोग होते हैं उन लोग बुक पढ़ते नहीं हैं, आजकल सुनते हैं बुक्स, ऑडिबल जैसे जो है. Someone is reciting the book or reading out the book for you and you're listening to it. So go with whatever format you like. And it is also up to writers nowadays to convert their works into accessible formats. So make a documentary out of your book. Make short videos about the book. Go on podcasts. Make short, accessible educational videos about whatever your core idea is. So I think all of us have to do that because the media landscape is changing. We can't expect everyone to read a book.
No, in general, so the question was about how to वो habit कैसे integrate करा जाए?
नहीं, मतलब कि I'm presuming the goal of the doing that is to imbibe the content. But my view is let's go where the consumers are.
Consumers are, absolutely. But regardless, in order to just propagate the habit of reading, I'm associated with a project where, and Haryana government has also planned, and the project is picking up, where they plan to open libraries. And I did something similar with the foundation, with my foundation. And a lot of people, and I'm learning it from a lot of people who are doing in Gujarat and elsewhere, in order to just inculcate or bring in that the next generation starts reading more books, and there should be more libraries and more access to that material. जो है नहीं, but it's only available on internet. That in order to make that those books accessible, more libraries should be open, and our Haryana government is doing something similar on those lines, where they're opening more libraries in rural areas. Around 500 or 600 libraries is what is planned right now. That's a great initiative, and I think a lot of well-meaning people in the Sant Samaj and civil society, they do agree to the idea that there should be more libraries. So yes, could build up on that as well.
Okay, so maybe I have a different take on this personally because I was not someone who grew up being a voracious reader. I actually inculcated this habit in me. So maybe we, so don't you guys think stuff like,
Was your father a reader?
Yeah, he was.
And your family, do you guys have a library of books?
Oh yeah, but I never touched one.
Your father must have been really unhappy with you.
I never touched one. But then now it's gone from no books to only books. So don't you think maybe things like book reading clubs, right? Maybe a lot of times somebody may not have the capacity to, let's say, gobble up a book in a week or 2 weeks. But if they were part of a book reading club, which becomes a sort of a habit that maybe once in 15 days, once in 10 days, I'm going to be covering 10, 15 pages. I'm going to be discussing it with 15 other people via Zoom call. Don't you think that would be, maybe we can discuss that and,
So I think that definitely helps. If you're part of a cohort, if you're part of, you have peers who are doing this together. It's like going on a exercise regime or a diet regime together, right? So it works better, for sure. But I still would say that we have to keep the technology context in mind. So if you go back 50 years, we didn't have this kind of technology, right? And ultimately a book is a medium to communicate ideas. That's how I see it. So if you want to communicate ideas, now we have many other formats, many other avenues. तो क्यों ना उसका उपयोग किया जाए? और ये एक फैक्ट है कि सब लोग नहीं पढ़ सकते हैं या पढ़ना नहीं चाहते हैं या उनके पास टाइम नहीं है. पर वो 1 घंटे का पॉडकास्ट सुन लेंगे, वो कोई डॉक्यूमेंट्री देख लेंगे नेटफ्लिक्स में या और कहीं पे. तो मेरे को लगता है राइटर्स को वहीं जाना चाहिए. आप अपनी बुक्स को कन्वर्ट करिए. अगर इतना रिसेप्शन मिल रहा है अगर आपकी बुक को, तो आप उसके बारे में डॉक्यूमेंट्री बनाइए. And nowadays, that classic long tail is there, where niche subjects, niche areas are finding traction. I mean, if people in India, thousands and millions of them, are watching documentaries on obscure subjects about, I don't know, North American history or European history, they would also be interested in Indian history, I'm sure.
And so what he in general wants to say, that be sure of your consumer.
And they are. I mean, let's not try to force fit them into something we want.
Well, I guess that's the perfect way to wrap up today's session. So once again, thanks to each and every one of you. And I hope, to see many more books from all of you and many more people. And may 1,000 flowers bloom in the world of writing.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you, Kushal.